We're here with Mr. Nissim Moses, one of the most prominent historians of the Bene Israel Jewish community of India. He is very unique in the aspect of a historian because he has very good knowledge of Hebrew, the English language, as well as the native language of Marathi. So he has a perspective that other historians do not have. He has a knowledge that other historians from other communities do not have about the Bene Israel. So it's an honor for us to speak with him and to get his knowledge about the history of the community. Thank you, Mr. Moses, for joining us today.
Yeah.
Let's start with the origins of the Bene Israel community. Very few people in the West know about the community. Can you tell us the history of the community? Why did the Bene Israel come to India and their origins, if you could, please?
About 2,300 years ago, when the Greeks were occupying the land of Israel, they started harassing the Jews, especially the people who were Kohanim and Levites, the priestly class. And as a result, they made life very difficult, and they wanted to cause a disruption in the Jewish services in the temple by sacrificing pigs and other non-kosher animals. And this was abominable for the Jews. And they decided to depart from the land, what they call Yerida. And the Levites, who we claim are our ancestors, joined up with the people from the tribe of Zebulun, who were sailors, and sailed east towards India from the Gulf of Eilat. Nobody knows exactly from where they started, but that's an assumption. And they sailed east. Unfortunately, they arrived on the west coast of India during the monsoon season. And the monsoon season, the storms on the west coast of India are very strong and violent. And in those days, they didn't go just by one ship, they went by several ships, as one helping and protecting the other in case of problems. And some of the ships sank. Some were probably driven further south, nobody knows. But the Bene Israel descended from 7 men and 7 women who were washed ashore on the coast, Konkan coast at Navgaon. Several people were thrown ashore dead, and they apparently were revived later on by Parshuram, and they became Chitpavan Brahmins. But the Bene Israels have multiplied ever since then, and today are numbering about 85 to 100,000 people. Now these are not the 10 lost tribes of Israel. These are the tribes that came after the Jews returned to Israel when Cyrus the Great, or what they call Koresh in Hebrew, permitted the Jews to go back and rebuild the temple.
Mr. Moses, can you explain to us about the divisions of the kingdoms in Israel after the kingdom was divided after the death of King Solomon?
Israel at that time were divided in 2 parts, Judah and Samaria, and the land of Israel, the kingdom of Israel. Our Bene Israel community originated in the area of Zebulun, the Levites from the tribe of Zebulun.
And where was that?
In the southwest of Haifa, where the cave of Elijah is there. That's where they originated.
And there was extensive trade between many Middle Eastern countries and India for well over, and the Roman Empire for well over 2,000 years.
Oh yes.
So there were many Jewish merchants and traders trading with many of the kingdoms of India. Is that where they knew about India and the kingdoms of India?
You see, the Jews were always been traders. Israel is situated in such a way that it formed a sea route which was safer than the land route to Asia. And as a result of which they could bring in spices, gold, silver, exotic birds, animals to Israel and forward them to the West.
You know, Greek.
So they were aware of it from the time of Solomon, King Solomon.
You know, the Greeks chronicle the journey, you know, from Egypt to India, and they said that if you followed the monsoon winds, you could reach India within 40 days. So even back then, they had knowledge of journeying to India in a short period of time. So the question is, the Jews had some comfort level with these areas, being merchants and traders. So when the danger arose in Israel, do you feel that there was some kind of feeling that they could find safe harbor in India?
I have no doubt about that. Because, you see, India was known, if you remember in the Bible they say that Koresh ruled from Hodu to Kush, from India to Africa. You see? So they were aware of it. It was mentioned in the Bible. So all the Jews had to do was to go towards safety, away from the Greeks, away from the West. And the safest place that they knew, a land of prosperity, fertility, fertility, was India.
So can you tell us about the experience of the Bene Israel when they first reached India? What did they encounter when they reached India? Did they encounter people that were hostile, people that were welcoming? What was their experience when they first arrived?
The Bene Israels have always been a welcome community from prehistoric times. That is from the time they arrived in India to today. The only country in the world where the Jews never saw anti-Semitism in any form at any time under any rule was India.
Don't you think that's something special when you look at the Jews of Poland and Russia and Germany and Yemen, and all they had was suffering, whereas the Jews of India were loved and cherished?
In an important aspect of being treated well by your neighbors is for them to understand you and you to respect them. And when they understand you and you respect them, you obtain respect. The Jews did some very elegant and politically wise things in India. For example, they did not eat beef. They did not refuse to eat in their neighbor's house. They said, we will not eat beef, we will not eat non-kosher fish, but we will eat in your house. And when they invited their neighbors ate in their house. But what does this eating in each other's house create? It creates a dialogue where you're able to exchange ideas, views, begin to understand the various aspects which control the lives of both the communities, both the people. And that generates harmony.
Mr. Moses, can you explain to us why the Jews stayed in the Konkan for so long before arriving in Bombay? Why was there that sense of isolation in that region until the British arrived?
You see, when they arrived in India, there were no Christians there, there were no Muslims there. And cities like Bombay, Pune and all did not exist. And they were an agricultural based society and community. So the Konkan is a very fertile region where they could prosper and develop their financial resources. That's why you see there were today at one time 140 villages where the Bene Israel's names originate or supposed to originate. It was not that names originate there, but the villages took the names of those people. Why? Because when they were prosperous, people or suppliers or shopkeepers built their enterprises around these houses to supply these people with goods. And those days, there were not 5 people to a family, there were about 30 people to a family, 40 people to a family. So when you're supplying to 30, 40 people in a joint family system, you need a lot of supplies. And that made it profitable for the shopkeepers to make shops. And when the shops came there, more people came there. And that entity slowly grew into a village. And what did the village do? They adopted the name of the original Bene Israel resident. That's how you will find that they have names like Kolatkar, Roekar, Satamkar, Gozalkar. Now the word Kar is a corrupted form of Ikar. Ikar means farmer in Hebrew.
Farmer.
And Ro'eh is shepherd. Satam is to shut one up. Gozal is young of a bird. Matzil is the savior.
Much of this comes from your research because of your knowledge of Marathi.
Exactly.
Hebrew.
Exactly. You see, these are Hebrew words. They have no roots in Marathi. Besides, Marathi did not exist for 1200 years. Sorry, 1500 years after the arrival. Marathi became a dialect in 1200 AD and became a full-fledged language in 1600 AD. And our names are already existing, and the villages with our names are already existing. It could not have come from Marathi. Not even from local dialect that preceded Marathi.
And really, this is really because of the research that you've done, because many of the Western scholars had assumed that the names came from the villages, and it's the other way around.
You see, my great-grandfather, Chaim Samuel Kemker, he was a historian, and he did a lot of pioneering work in writing our heritage and our history. But he wrote that in about 1850 to 1870, where when they prayed in Hebrew, they concentrated on the intonations, what they call in Hebrew zarka makaf. That's how to intonate and how to make the sound. They did not concentrate on learning the everyday use of Hebrew language. With the result, yes, they knew Hebrew very well, but they knew biblical or prayer Hebrew. The everyday spoken colloquial Hebrew they did not know. So, in view of the fact that they did not know Hebrew, they had to find a solution for the origin of our names. And it was he who proposed the theory that our names originate from the villages. And most Western socio-anthropologists, they read his book, they don't know enough of Hebrew either, because they're living in America or in England or wherever it is. And they follow in a sheep-like fashion what was said. Well, when I came to Israel, I started studying, and one day I was reciting the same story to one of my friends, and he told me, Moses, don't you realize that these words have Hebrew roots? And that lit a lamp in my mind. And I started researching the subject. And the more I researched, the more I was convinced. And the more I found names which had roots in Hebrew, and I determinedly tried to find the roots in Marathi and could not find them. So my conclusion was that our names have Hebrew roots.
Can you tell us also the connection between the Bene Israel and the Portuguese, because the Inquisition was brought to Goa by the Portuguese. Do you think the Bene Israel were aware of the persecution that the Portuguese were bringing? Do you think that's why they stayed away from these regions for so long?
You see, the Bene Israels are a very clever community. They want to find out, and they keep abreast of what's happening in the world, even at that time. And the first settlers from the west in India were the Portuguese. They occupied Bombay Islands, they occupied Goa. In fact, even they attacked and captured Chul at one time. And when they captured Chul, the people of the Bene Israel community ran away from there, knowing what the Portuguese were doing in Goa and Bombay. So, till the Portuguese controlled Bombay, the Jews kept away from, the Bene Israel kept away from them. It's only after the Portuguese handed it over to the British, and the British were intent on building an East India Company army, that the Jews started immigrating to Bombay.
Let's talk about that positive aspect of when the British came and the connection to the Bene Israel, because the Bene Israel prospered quite extensively under British rule. Can you talk to us about the connections between the British and the Bene Israel community?
You see, when they came to Bombay, the British were looking for soldiers, reliable soldiers, who would support their trading activities in Bombay and in the what they call at that time the Bombay Presidency. And they took in the Bene Israels. And the number of Bene Israels grew in large numbers. And then in 1857, there was an Indian army mutiny all over India. But the British Indian Army troops in the Bombay Presidency, who were under Bene Israel officers, you know, at one time there were 50% of British Indian officers, Indian Army officers, the Bombay Presidency were Bene Israel.
50%.
50%. And a community that barely numbered 7,000 to 10,000 people at that time. So you can imagine 50% of the officers were Bene Israel.
So there was a
and they were loyal to the British, and the British used the Bombay Presidency armies to regain control of the rest of India. The first person to warn the British about the Indian mutiny was a Bene Israel soldier.
It was a mutually harmonious relationship, right? Because the British did quite a lot in terms of education and literacy and health care for the Bene Israel community. Is that right?
You see, they found in the Bene Israels a loyal community, and as a result of which they permitted their missionaries to open schools, to take these people and to promote their prosperity, to the effect that when after the Indian mutiny, when the British government took over India, they formed regiments on communal basis, and there were not enough Bene Israels to form a communal regiment. So they permitted the Bene Israels to occupy positions which did not require, like doctors, lawyers, accountants, you know, trainers, and such, railway drivers, you know, shipping people, shipbuilders, in all the professions where they could not get enough of British into India. And they permitted the Bene Israels to be educated in English schools because of loyalty. They permitted them to become town councillors, mayors.
Doctors, lawyers.
You see, so all the professions that helped them to maintain administrative control of India. Later on, they joined even the British Indian Army. And the first people, among the first people to be promoted to officers' rank as King Commissioned officers were the Bene Israels. And in fact, after independence, many of the very senior officers of the Indian Army were Bene Israels, like Vice Admiral Sampson, Major General Sampson, and Lieutenant General Jacob recently died. You see.
Can you tell us about when the British instilled equal wages for the Bene Israel soldiers compared to the British?
In 1870, Chaim Samuel Kenker, my great-grandfather, he was in accounts in Pune, and he wrote to the British government and petitioned them, as a result of which I've got a document, a copy of the document issued by the British. How will you treat the Jews of India? Which implied basically the Bene Israels. And it specifically mentioned there that the Jews will be treated as Europeans and the Parsis as natives. Now what does that mean?
Wow.
They did not get European status, they got European rations. The Bene Israel never claimed to be Europeans. We were proud to be Indians. But we've got European status from the point of rations. We got positions which were not allowed to other Indians, like engine drivers, station masters, right? Forest rangers, chief forest rangers, you name it.
You know the expression opportunity takers. When the opportunity came along, do you think the Bene Israel took them?
It's not only that they came along and we took them, but we were built for that. You see, when you swear allegiance to a flag, whether it be British or Indian, your allegiance is your oath is what counts.
You know, there's been much written about British missionaries and Scottish missionaries when they came to India. When they found the Bene Israel, they literally believed that these were the children of Israel, and they had they made great attempts to convert them, but they were not successful at all. But they never doubted that they were Jewish.
You see, the aim of the British missionaries was to convert or to bring what they called at that time one of the lost tribes. They were not aware of it also, the Bene Israels, abreast of contemporary Judaism or modern Judaism, and then to convert them to Christianity. They tried this with the Bene Israel and with the people of the Shevet Menashe in the northeast. The Shevet Menashe, because they were isolated, fell for it. But the Bene Israels took all their blessings. We have more to thank the British missionaries for our return to the religion of our ancestors than to our rabbis. They did more for us. They translated the Bible, they translated the prayers, they transliterated the prayers into Hebrew. They taught the Bene Israels these things. They educated them in their schools in the same class as the Europeans and Anglo-Indian.
You know, many people are not aware that the British were the superpower at that time. And really, wouldn't you say they exposed the Bene Israel to the world?
That's true. The British were a superpower and they did it. But the Bene Israels also returned their trust in order of magnitude. This is why you see that many of the Bene Israels, when they immigrated from India, many came to Israel, but many went to England, to Canada, Australia. And there are large communities there. You see?
So can you tell us a little bit about why the Bene Israel and when they decided to immigrate to Israel?
If you look at the history of my mother and my father, right? My mother was very pro-British and not very pro-Israel. My mother, on the other hand, was very pro-Israel. My father was pro-British, my mother was pro-Israel. Now, if you take this into account, then what would I be doing? Would I go to Canada, to England, or would I go to Israel? And like I told you some time ago in my personal conversation, that I came to Israel because the opportunities were for my development, and my contribution to a people was greater than my Zionist background. I was never a Zionist. And even today I'm not a Zionist. I'm an Israeli, a Jew. I love this country, but I'm not a Zionist.
Can you tell us about what happened when the Bene Israel first arrived in Israel? Were there hardships, were there difficulties that they had to endure?
Yes. The Jewish Agency did a great service in bringing the Jews to India, but they did to Israel, but they did a very big disservice in the way they handled the whole immigration process. They lied. They didn't tell the truth. They deceived the people. And I'm going to use these words because this is exactly what happened. They promised them one thing and railroaded them into another thing.
Do you think that they didn't take advantage, the state of Israel, they didn't take advantage of the skills and knowledge of the Bene Israel community? They were very proficient in English, they were very proficient academics and skilled people. And do you think that they could have given them greater opportunities in government, in government and in public relations and in industry? Do you think that they didn't take full advantage of their skills?
The Israeli government at that time was very short-sighted and narrow-minded, though they claimed to be very liberal. You see, when the Bene Israel came, I'll give the example of one company, the company that I work for, Israel Aircraft Industries. They needed people with certification from the CAA or the British CAA or the FAA. And in India they found a large supply of Indian Jews, Bene Israels, who were certified aeronautical people. So I remember Ostrinsky, Arya Ostrinsky, the vice president of the company, he used to go with my neighbor, Moshe Aloni, who was the head of manpower in Israel Aircraft Industries, to the Ulpan and get the Jews in Lud and Ramleh area to come and work in IAI, because they knew English, they knew aeronautics, and many of them became senior people in the company. At a later time, when I applied for a job in Israel Aircraft Industries, I was promised the world because I was qualified. And I didn't ask Israel what Israel can do for me. I brought qualifications as an acoustic expert to the company.
You made great contributions to the state of Israel.
Oh yes. I'm proud to say that I established the acoustic department of Israel Aircraft Industries. After that, I established the development program for the area around Ben Gurion Airport, for acoustic noise program. I developed and established the acoustic unit of the Ministry of Environment. I established the master level course in acoustics in Hebrew University. I was elected to the Congress and the Central Secretariat of the Institute of Engineers and the Institute of Engineers in Israel, which had never happened before. An Oriental person had never stepped in those shoes before.
Really?
Right? I became the head of the insurance committee. And then I was selected to go and establish the liaison office of Israel Aircraft Industries in Delhi. And I made and signed 19 contracts worth $450 million within a period of 3.5 years, which is an unheard of achievement in a period when Israel Aircraft Industries was in the dumps. After the cancellation levy, the Ministry of Defense was bent on decimating Israel Aircraft Industries. And here was Nissim Moses, who brought them 19 contracts worth $450 million from the East, from a country that they believed had no money.
Do you ever think what would have happened if you weren't there, in terms of, say, if something had happened to you in the war and you were not there? I mean, the relations and the bilateral trade between India and Israel, especially with the military, would probably not exist today.
You're right. You see, I was in the Yom Kippur War and I was injured at the canal, and my friend next to me was killed. And an American doctor, an ex-Vietnam veteran, came to Israel to help the injured soldiers, Dr. Paul Brief. And he saved my life. And you know what? The best part of my life came after that day. And you know, that day when I was injured, it's historic in my memory, because I met my wife on the eve of Simchat Torah. I immigrated to Israel on the eve of Simchat Torah. I was injured on the eve of Simchat Torah. The doctor disappeared after my operation, and I found him on the eve of Simchat Torah after 40 years.
Is that a coincidence?
I don't know what you call it, but it's weird coincidence.
Mr. Moses, can you tell us about the second and third generation of Bene Israel living in Israel today? Many of them are well assimilated, many of them have intermarried with other Israelis, and they seem to be really a fabric of Israel today. And can you tell us about a community that was literally given nothing and who have achieved great things here in Israel? What do you attribute their success to?
You see, the Bene Israels, when they came to Israel, were treated quite badly. But many of them also succeeded, like myself, my cousin Isaac, right, who became a pilot in El Al. And you know, when Okamoto shot up the airport, he was the injured pilot in that. Then my other cousin became a captain, a port pilot in Eliam. Then there was another cousin who became a radio officer. There were people who became station masters, or what do you call from the airport, station managers of El Al. The people became GM in Elbit. People became architects. The people became architect teachers in schools, so aeronautical engineers, leading in professions. They have made their mark in Israel. So if anybody thinks that the Bene Israel were a community that did nothing or achieved nothing, they're completely wrong. They did not ask for it, they worked for it, and they achieved it. All because of their own efforts. They did not get any help. In fact, the government or the institutions here always put barricades in their path. My daughter became a ballet instructor and she's in America now.
Very successful.
But when she was in the 6th grade, or the 2nd grade, her teacher told us that in the 2nd grade, barely 6 years old, or 7 years old, told us that she didn't think that my daughter was capable of higher education. And she did a master's. And she's an instructor in universities and teachers training colleges of ballet and dance, and one of the leading instructors in the west coast of America.
And your son is very successful.
And my son is a computer engineer in artificial intelligence. So these are just a few examples that I can give you off the cuff. But there are many, many examples of people who have done very well. For example, even in the kibbutz, in the north, you know, they have turkey. Turkey in Hebrew is called hodu. Hodu means from India. The first birds came from India. And the turkey breeder who did that and who built up the industry was a Bene Israel. You see, if you look at the Bene Israels, whatever field they took up on themselves, they always achieved the highest position in that field. Whether it be agriculture, whether it be engineering, whether it be medicine, whether it be army service, they always came to the top. You know, people talk Israel didn't contribute to the creation state of Israel. I'm going to give you one example.
The Bene Israel.
The Bene Israel. In India, there was an Ashton family who studied my school. The eldest brother, Ellis Ashton, joined the British Indian Army, and he was sent to Iraq. And there he got fascinated by the Haganah and sympathized with them, and used to help them to raid the warehouses, ammunition, and gunnery of the British in Iraq, to raid them and issue false documents to smuggle them out into Israel. Also helped to, smuggle Iraqis, Jews, out of Iraq into Israel. And one of the operations, there was a CIA operator in the Haganah who betrayed this group, and he went ahead sort of to clear the path, and the British were waiting, and he shot him and killed him. They never announced why. But his family, when he came back to a few years later to Israel, his brother Gabby Ashton joined the border security force and rose to the rank of deputy commander of Gaza under Arik Sharon. Then he was made strategic commander Northern Command, and then he was transferred to become commander of West Bank. His other brother, Jackie Ashton, joined the Israeli Air Force, was sent to America to train on the Hawk missile batteries. When he came back to India, to Israel, he became major base commander of the missile base in the north. When he retired from the army, he established a yishuv, or settlement in the north called Adi. And then he took up a hobby, and he took up another hobby and became a member of the Freemasons. And today he's the second highest ranked Freemasons in Israel. Now, what's coincidental is that Israel is a sub-territory of India, and Indian Freemasons, among them who my grandfather, my uncles and all, the Grandmaster was a Grandmaster of Israel too. And I've got documents to show that.
Mr. Moses, like yourself, many of the Bene Israel have shed their blood and sweat for this country. Do you think that needs to be recognized in Israel and around the world?
I have researched the subject, and I found out today 120 Bene Israels, and still I'm working on the Kochini part, but I've already found more than 15 Kochinis, and I've tabulated this list and prepared the obituaries from Hebrew into English, translated, and I'm trying to bring out a booklet in the near future on this subject. They have spilled their blood for this country like every other community, and they should be honored. My intent is basically to have them honored on Martyrs Memorial Day, the day before independence in Israel, and on Yom Kippur when they say the Kaddish for the departed. This community of Indian Jews has contributed significantly to the creation and the establishment and the sustenance of Israel.
And success. Thank you, Mr. Moses.
You're welcome.